All right, let's start the sew along for my second Know Me dress. It's pattern number ME2044, and we have two versions. View A has a bias cut skirt, and then view B has a paneled skirt with gathers. It comes in sizes 8 to 26, and the supplies you'll need are an invisible zipper and bra straps and sliders. These. And then an invisible zipper, and let's go ahead and get started. Here are the instructions and a closer look at view A and B. View A has a bias cut skirt, and then view B has a 3-paneled skirt, and the top is bias cut. The bottom two are gathered. And now here are the pattern pieces. I'm going to go ahead and cut them out in my size, and then we will cut out the fabric and we will start the sew along. Okay, let's go over all the pattern pieces. This is piece 1. It's the upper bodice. It's for both views. And you're going to cut 4 of these. Piece 2 is the lower bodice. It's also for view A and B, and you're going to cut 4. Pattern piece 3 is the bodice back. You're going to cut 1 on the fold. Piece 4 is the bodice side back. You're going to cut 2. All these bodice pieces are for view A and B. You're going to cut all of them. Piece 5 is the front strap for both views, and you're going to cut 2. Piece 6 is the loop for the strap. You're going to cut 2. Piece 7 is the bodice back facing, and you're going to cut 1 on the fold. You're also going to cut 1 inner facing on the fold. And piece 8 is the tie. I still have to cut this out, but piece A is the tie. You're going to cut it for both views, and you're going to cut 1. Okay, piece 9 is the skirt front, and it's for A and B. For view B, you're going to cut it at this line. For view A, you're going to use the whole thing, and you're going to cut it on the bias. Make sure for all these pieces that you are marking all the notches. Pattern piece number 10 is the skirt back, and you're going to cut it for A and B. For view B, you're going to cut it at this cut line. Make sure to mark all the notches. Okay, and for view B, you have a few extra pieces, the gathered panels, so you'll cut those out. I'm going to be making view A, so I just have the 2 skirt pieces, and I'm going to cut them on the bias. And here is a cut guide if you need help with that. And let's get started. Okay, I have all my pieces cut out, and I am using this really pretty silk satin from Mood Fabrics. I need to iron these pieces, but this is my favorite silk. It's just so soft and pretty. Okay, so step 1 is for A and B, and we're gonna fuse the interfacing to the wrong side of each matching fabric section following manufacturer's instructions. Okay, so basically you're just going to put the interfacing on piece 7 and 11. These are the facings, and I'll go ahead and do that and be right back. Okay, I've ironed on some interfacing to both these facing pieces, and now we're going to move on to step 2, which is we're going to reinforce piece 1 in this little corner right here. We're gonna just sew like this, a little corner, because we're going to snip this corner in and we don't want it to rip. So So after sewing piece 1, we're gonna cut right here. We're gonna snip it, so we just wanna sew a line of stitches right here to reinforce that corner. And I'll go do that and I'll be right back. Here is the graphic for that. You can see right there. Okay, now step 3, we're gonna sew the straps. You're gonna fold it in half, right sides together, and stitch it at 1/4 inch. And then we're gonna turn those straps right side out and we'll baste the edges closed. Okay, so we'll fold this right sides together, sew it at 1/4 inch, and then we'll turn it. All right, I'm gonna use a loop turner to turn my straps, or you can use a safety pin, or however you prefer. I think loop turners are the easiest way, but you can do whichever way you prefer. And then I'll turn the other one and I'll press these. Now we're gonna take the straps and attach them to the upper front bodice. You're going to attach it to the top where you have your markings. So I have 2 markings right there, and I will attach it right there on both sides. Okay, now I'm going to pin the front lining pieces over the top of the strap and the front. Okay, now we're going to stitch the front edge in a 1/4 inch seam allowance right there on both sides. All right, I've stitched the front edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and now we are going to stitch the upper edge. So this edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance also, and you're going to do it from starting from the dot that you have by the front edge, from here all the way to the end. And you'll do that on both sides. So you'll start at the dot that you have marked, and then you'll go all the way to the edge. Okay, I've stitched the upper edge, and here I'm gonna show you the pattern piece. So here's the marking you should have had on the top, and you'll stitch it all the way over. Sorry, there, and then stitch it all the way over 1/4 inch, and then the front 1/4 inch. And now we're gonna stitch the bottom in 1/4 inch from this marking to this marking, just right there. And you're gonna do it on both pieces, and I'll do that and be right back. Okay, now that we've done that, we're gonna turn it right sides out. And now we're going to understitch the facing. And we're gonna end. So we're gonna understitch it, and understitching is stitching the seam allowance down. So on this edge, you're stitching the seam allowance down close to that seam line. And on the lining side, and it holds the lining in so it doesn't poke out. And then you're going to understitch it until you get 1 inch from the edge, so to there. And you'll do that on both sides. Okay, so I've understitched the lining, and you can see I stitched the seam allowance down to the lining side close to the seam line. Right there. And then I stopped at 1 inch before the edge, just like that. And then when you turn it around, it keeps the lining nice and snug under so it doesn't poke out, just like that. And then you'll press it also. On these front pieces, you're also going to clip this corner where we reinforced it. You're going to clip it right there so that it'll turn better. So we'll just snip it to there. And then when it's turned, this part will lay nicer because you're going to sew this to the bottom bodice. And there you have your upper front bodice pieces. And now we will move on to the lower bodice pieces. You should have 4 of them, just like the top ones. And make sure you have all your markings. We're gonna do the same thing with these pieces that we did with the top, and we're gonna reinforce this corner right here on all the pieces. And I'll be right back. Now we're going to sew the front edge right there at a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides. After you sew the front edge right there at 1/4 inch seam allowance, you're going to sew the top and bottom edge from dot to dot. So at 1/4 inch seam allowance from mark to mark on both sides and on both pieces. Alright, once you've sewed those 2 spots on each side from dot to dot, you'll turn it right side out. And now we'll press each piece. Okay, and now once you have pressed both these pieces, we're going to top stitch the front edge just like we did the top pieces at 3/8 inch on both sides. Okay, now we're going to attach the upper bodice to the lower bodice. And we're going to do that by, we're gonna leave the lining piece of each piece. Okay, so we're gonna leave the facing or the lining side of each piece free, so you don't catch that when you sew it. So just this piece, the main fabrics of each piece of the upper and lower bodice together, and we'll stitch that, but making sure that we don't catch the lining while we stitch it. So we'll just stitch it right there, and we will do that with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, so now that you have stitched the upper bodice to the lower bodice right there, and you've left the linings free, you're going to do the same thing on this side by putting them or matching right sides together, the lower and the upper bodice, and then we'll stitch the same way at 3/8 inch. And I'll be right back. All right, we've stitched the linings together, and this is what it should look like. On the front and the inside. Okay, and now we will repeat that with the other side, and I'll be right back. All right, I finished both sides of the front bodice, and now I'm gonna go press it, and then I will baste the side edge and the lower edge shut. And I'll be right back. Okay, now we're gonna sew the bodice back, and we're gonna take this bodice back piece and the bodice side back, and we're gonna sew them together. There and there. Okay, I've sewed the back bodice, And don't forget to finish your seams. I just used a zigzag stitch because I don't have any pink serger thread and I thought it would be pretty with this silk to match. So I just pressed them towards the sides rather than open since I finished them. So I have the back finished. And okay, now we're gonna sew piece 6, and it's the loop. We're gonna fold it right sides together and stitch it with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, I've sewed my loops and I'll turn them right sides out. And I'll do the other one and then I will press it. Okay, now that I have sewed the back bodice together, I'm going to add the strap adjusters. And I'm going to use the clear ones. And right now we just need the loops. So we will put it around the loop and then we're going to baste it right there. And we'll do the same thing for this one. We're going to put the circle part of the adjuster on the loop, fold it in half, and then we will put it where we have the markings at the top of the back bodice. So right there. And then we will go ahead and baste these into place. Okay, now that we've attached the loops with the bra rings, I'm going to quickly finish the bottom of this facing, and then we will attach it to the top like that and sew it at 1/4 inch. Okay, I've sewed the back facing onto the back bodice, and now we're going to understitch the facing down. And to understitch, you're going to stitch the seam allowance on the facing side, and you're going to stitch it as close to this seam line as you can. So I'll go do that and I'll be right back. Okay, I sewed the facing on and I understitched it. You can see I stitched close to the seam line and I stitched the seam allowance towards the facing. And now I'm going to press the facing down. And you can see we have our strap sliders and our slap adjusters. And so I'll press this down and be right back. All right, so we're working with the right side and we're going to flip the facing up on the back bodice. And we're going to pin the front bodice to the back bodice. And now we're going to flip the facing over and just pin that over the front bodice. Okay, So now I've pinned the front bodice to the back bodice and flipped the facing over, and I will go stitch that at 5/8 inch along the edge. Okay, I finished that edge with a zigzag stitch, and I'm going to flip the facing over, and now we have the front and back attached. Okay, and now you're going to just hand stitch the facing to the seam allowance right here and right here so that it stays down. So you'll hand stitch there and there. Now we're going to add the strap sliders to the straps. This is the slider, and so we're going to put it through one end and then back through the other end, like that. And now, so on the back, we're going to take this and stick it through the loop, through the ring. And then this is, so now we have this through the ring on the back loop, and you're going to stick the strap back up through there and then back down. Okay, now we're going to move on to the front skirt piece, and we are going to reinforce this upper edge right where we have the marking. We have 2 marks here and here. We're going to do a line of stitches to reinforce it because we're going to clip right at the markings. So I'm going to go ahead and sew a line right there and be right back. All right, I've done a line of stitching right below the dots, and now we are going to clip right above the dots. So we're going to clip to the dot, but not through these line of stitching. Okay, now I have the skirt back, and we're gonna sew the darts, and I'm just gonna mark those really quickly, and then I'll go sew them, and I'll be right back. When I do darts, I don't like to back stitch. I like to tie the threads at the end in a knot and then trim it. It makes it so it doesn't pucker as much. All right. So there's the darts pressed in, and then I'll trim the threads. Okay, after you're done with the darts, we're going to stitch the skirt back and skirt front together at the right side seam. So we'll stitch from the top all the way down to the bottom, and we'll leave the left side open. Okay, now I'm going to stitch the left side seam 3 inches below the notch down, so 3 inches below the notch down to the bottom. Okay, the next step is we're going to attach the bodice to the skirt. Okay, so we're going to pin the left bodice, the left front that's on its own, to the left front skirt. And it's gonna match up perfectly where you cut this notch and the bottom of the bodice. So you'll just pin it. Okay, so once you've pinned the left front, you're going to do the other side that's attached to the back bodice, and you'll just pin it, matching the fronts where you cut those notches. So you'll pin it, and I'm gonna match up the side seams, skirt, and pin the back bodice to the back skirt. Okay, and once we've pinned the front bodice and the back bodice onto the skirt, we're going to baste it in place. And I'll be right back. We're going to clip the facing just like we did the front of the skirt. So there should be notches on your facing, and you're going to clip down to that. You're also going to reinforce on the facing just like you did the front of the skirt. Okay, so I've clipped the facing, and now we're going to lay the facing on top of the bodice and the skirt. The bodice will be sandwiched in between the skirt and the facing. So this is in the middle. Okay, once we've attached the facing to the front and the bodice is sandwiched in between the facing and the skirt, we're gonna go sew this at 5/8 inch. Okay, I've sewed the facing on. I'm also going to finish this bottom edge. I forgot to do it before. I'll finish that, and then I'm gonna understitch the facing, and I'll stitch the seam allowance on the facing side. And then once you understitch it, you'll turn it in, and you have the front of your dress. And I just have some threads to snip, but then all we have left to do is attach the slider to this side, and then also we're going to sew the invisible zipper. But I will understitch this and press it and be right back. Okay, now that we have pressed the facing in and we have the straps attached, we're going to attach the invisible zipper. I'm going to use an invisible zipper, and I will do that and be right back. Okay, I have put the invisible zipper in, and if you guys do not have an invisible zipper foot, this is why you should get one. This is the first try. Look at that. It's perfect. Okay, and now all we have to do is we have to tie the strap, or sew the strap. So for the strap, what we're gonna do is we're gonna fold it like bias tape. You'll press it in half, and you'll fold the ends inward so it's finished on the end once you sew it. So fold it in half, and then you're gonna fold the ends in towards the center, and then you'll fold it shut and you'll sew it. So it's kind of like bias tape, but you're just gonna sew it closed. So I will go do that, and I'll be right back. Once you have your ties done, you're going to thread them through the front bodice casings on each of the bodice pieces, and you'll go down one side, and then you'll go through the bottom and to the other side. And then you'll repeat that on the other side, and you can scrunch it up and tie it in a bow. And then the last thing we have to do is sew the hem of the dress, and I'm gonna actually wait to do that until tomorrow because I want it to hang for 24 hours since it's bias cut, and that is it. I hope you guys like this dress just as much as I do. I cannot wait to see all your versions. Please tag me on Instagram and let me know if you guys have any questions about sewing it in the comments.